Hi, everybody. So before you are too quick to judge with some of the information you'll see in this interview with Dr. Karen Becker here, I just want to make it clear that you should watch it all the way through. There's critical information in here through the entire interview that is really vital to the keeping of our animals, keeping them thriving over just surviving. So please make sure you watch it all the way through for a full picture of what we talk about. Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Crean with All Species Consulting, and I am super excited to have finally, after many, many years we've been trying to plan this, Dr. Karen Becker. Many of you know Dr. Karen Becker as she is one of the most followed vets on the planet. That's my black palm. He's excited about you being on too. But she has been practicing integrative medicine with a host of different species for over 25 years now. I've known you for almost that long, about that long. When you were practicing, you had over 15,000 active clients. Is that correct?
They did.
And I remember going to your office and realizing how long of a wait it was sometimes to get in because you had so many people. And you saw a lot of really sad cases because they would come to you with their last hope. And I know many clients, especially here in the Chicago area, who attribute their pets' wellness and longevity to your groundbreaking practice. And so I have always been, I'm humbled that you're on with us, and I'm so glad that I can call you a colleague and a friend. We met, a long time ago when you were a newer vet, and you had already started questioning, especially nutrition and how those things went. Now, you and I both thought pellets were the answer at the time, right? Ultra-processed food. But over the years, we learned a lot of things, both through my experience as a biologist and what I do for a living, and then you as a practicing vet who saw these cases every single day for a long time. And I think it was Cricket, my Aracari, that brought me to you. She was my first Aracari, little toucan, and you diagnosed her with iron storage disease. And that's where we started talking about nutrition and what really should happen, and teas, and how teas could help her. And we kept her alive years beyond her diagnosis, which is unheard of. And so, everything that you've done for me and my animals has been absolutely amazing, and I can't thank you enough. But yeah, that's how we met. So we've known each other for a long time.
We have. And actually, so first of all, Jason, so great to connect with you. And yes, sometimes the silver lining of pandemics causing us to come to a screeching halt is that we have blocks of time open up. So as friends, we stay connected via texting, but it's really nice to connect this way as well. And so thank you for having me on. And you were my very first friend in Chicago. But you're my very first friend. Even in fact, when I was looking for condos, and I had a job there as an integrative exotic veterinarian at Animal Medical Center. And when I was looking for condos, I was driving around and I saw Chicago Birdhouse. And so I was like, and I just drove in and you were there. And so we immediately hit it off, and we have been friends ever since. So it has been, you are my longest standing Chicago friend, which is awesome. And I came to Chicago as an integrative exotic veterinarian, and thankfully, Dr. Brian Lento hired me as that to fulfill that role. So I was already living, I grew up in a very proactive household. Nutrition was important for my family. I went to vet school knowing I would be an integrative exotic veterinarian. I came out knowing I would be doing this, but Animal Medical Center, after doing my internship with Dr. Doug Mader in California, this was my first job. So I got kind of my bearings at a conventional animal hospital being the integrative exotic person. And you can only do that so long before there's not enough equipment. There's not a quiet room. There's not separate HVAC. There's not everything you want as an exotic vet. You know, when you're practicing as an exotic vet in a dog and cat practice, it's okay, but it's not ideal.
Right.
So I quickly had to do my own thing, and then kind of the rest was history. But you hit the nail on the head when it came to nutrition. I learned through veterinary school about ultra-processed extruded food, knowing I was not going to recommend it. I had a really heinous experience with my own personal dog with prescription diets. So I knew at that point, I had a little glimmer of hope going into vet school that prescription diets held some other lofty status besides regular dog food. I had an experience with prescription diets that I knew in my heart I would never feed them graduating from veterinary school, but it's so interesting because when we met, we were both on the same page. We knew that a seed-based diet, that just feeding sunflower seeds was terrible. And we both thought, you know what, going from sunflower seeds to pellets at least is a step in the right direction in that all those micronutrients, we're getting those into our birds. And that I think was synthetically comforting for us. And it took me we did, of course. Yeah. And this is, I think it's important to talk about this because as nutrition, politics, religion are all things that people will war and fight about for the rest of forever. Because as our knowledge shifts, as our knowledge changes and as research comes out, and as we learn more, we have to stop doing what we used to do and start doing new things.
Yes.
And that's controversial. Not everyone believes in that. You get a lot of pushback when you start applying new principles to a norm that has been set up that not everyone agrees with. You get quite a bit of pushback.
It's almost cultish around some of these brand names.
Absolutely.
It's scary because there are some simple truths with decades-long science that tells us that the processed food's not good for anything. And we just kind of ignore that when it comes to pets.
That's exactly what we do. In fact, I would go one step further and say that the World Health Organization, every human nutritionist, every human MD would say eat less processed food, eat more living whole real foods. The one category of healthcare practitioners that don't say that are veterinarians, which is a little shocking. And yet, if you think about it, part of it is, and I'm not bashing my colleagues, you are aware of this, veterinary schools, all of them are supported by a pet food company, and there's a tight relationship there. And we just assume that these relationships are natural, but it does introduce a bias into young veterinarians and vet students thinking. And I graduated thinking that a fully extruded, nutritionally complete and balanced diet was at least better than one type of seed. And I really did believe that. And it wasn't until some of my nutrition mentors said to me, in fact, Jason, I had some of my nutrition mentors visit Feathers Bird Clinic and Natural Pet, and they saw my organic extruded pet foods, exotic bird foods in my lobby.
Yep.
And this is when it hit me. One of my most lofty mentors said, so I had a really cute waiting room, if you remember. It was super cute.
I remember.
Okay. So he came in and he said, I love it that you've got a bank of freezers. And we talked, he said, I find it so interesting that you're selling extruded bird food, but you're kind of out on extruded dog and cat food. And it stopped me in my tracks because I thought, well, listen, this is organic extruded bird food. And he said, no, that's wonderful. I mean, thumbs up for the reduced glyphosate load. Yes. But what about all the other things that happen during extrusion? And I didn't have an answer. And that was the beginning.
Well, especially because there's things in there like peanuts.
Yeah.
Like organic peanuts are just a no-no. And yet it forms a base of those foods. And I mean, all you have to do is read the label. And it's like the secret that I've been let in on. And I'm looking around going, I can't be the only one that sees this, Yeah. But going back to vet schools, you and I both have spoken at vet schools. We've been invited speakers on nutrition at vet schools. And I was at a vet school last year, and all I had to do was say the word raw, and the hands flew up in the air. And and I'm speaking in a room where there are banners for every major pet food. And I've known for some time, having friends that have gone through veterinary school, that all their textbooks are purchased by the pet food manufacturers. But when we talk about vet students, are they learning about parrot nutrition?
No, Jason, no. And when I say no, in my avian medicine class, of course, there was a section on nutrition, but it's so minimal. It's so minimal. And it
Yeah.
really is, these are the accepted, a little bit like my dog and cat nutrition class.
Yeah.
These are the accepted brands that
Mm-hmm.
we believe in because they have done independent research. So these are the brands that we can stand behind and tell you as students that we believe that these are scientifically formulated and would provide the best nutrition. Done. That was my avian nutrition class, and that was my dog and cat nutrition class. Yeah.
Yep. And you said class. One class, yeah.
And nutrition was a module in avian medicine class, right? It was not avian nutrition. It was avian medicine. And then you had a week on formulated diets,
right?
Brands that you would recommend. Yes.
Correct. Yes. That's really terrifying. And the more and more we hear, the more and more we learn about just the lack of real science that is put into this. Now, when you said earlier that we text message, like today we were text messaging peer-reviewed papers, like that's the fun stuff that we get to do between each other. But it is amazing how a lot of nutrition studies, first of all, there really isn't any realistic ones that aren't biased. But there are, they're just extremely specific. Their sample sizes are small. There's just a lot of problems. And when you talk about whole food nutrition, I hear words like pseudoscience, because that's just something that people seem to be able to throw out that just dismisses the whole thing so they don't have to deal with it or accept it. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping this will become a series, because we have other vets around the world who are like, why are people feeding ultra processed food as the end all? Like, it's not solving any problems. And so, it starts in vet school though.
It does. And I do think it's important. I need to say first and foremost, in no way do I want anyone to think that we are bashing other avian veterinarians or dog and cat veterinarians by any means. The issue is because they don't have the education, and because in veterinary schools now they're teaching do not support fresh food for anything, not for birds, not for dogs, not for cats. Veterinarians, vet students just graduate saying don't do it. But when you want to have a conversation with your avian veterinarian or your dog or cat vet about whole food nutrition, other than your veterinarian saying, just don't do it, there's not a whole lot of dialogue as to why. And so if you can begin asking your veterinarian, hey, I'm interested in reducing, the US government says I should be eating 5 servings of fresh foods a day. I think I want to get that many into my bird or into my dog. I'm interested in doing that. And I understand that you're tentative about that or you don't agree, but I'd like to talk about why. If you can approach your veterinarian, not defensively, but with a desire to engage in a conversation, I think the conversation will go further. Because veterinarians have the same goal, Jason, and you're aware of this. What they don't want to see, as avian vets, we've seen so many nutritional deficiencies from what people were doing in the 60s and 70s, feeding peanuts and sunflower seeds, that we went from peanuts and sunflower seeds to ultra processed bird kibble. And now, 40 years later, many of us forward thinking, nutrition focused people are thinking, I don't know if bird kibble is any better than dog kibble or cat kibble. What about starting a dialogue about other types of foods that fits a species' more natural history? I think that's probably the biggest issue. With dogs and cats, we've got some diversity issues, but there's over 300 different citizens. Talk about a diversity swing. And what's interesting about the bird food market? Within the pet food industry, exotic animal pet foods are doing the exact same thing as dog and cat foods. The market's so tight and so competitive that they're diversifying. So back, in the olden days, when we were pups 20, 30 years ago, there was canary seed and parakeet, there were parakeet pellets and cockatiel pellets and macaw pellets. And you can pick between 4. Now, there's conure pellet. There's all these different types. There's 30, and if you look at dog's food, there's poodle, Royal Canin has a poodle food, a Yorkie food, a Shih Tzu food. But when you call the company and say, hey, I'm looking at your Shih Tzu and poodle food, I'm having a hard time discerning what the difference is. I mean, that's a great question for your pet food company. And when you call your bird pellet company and say, what's the difference between your cockatiel food and your conure food, your pellets, they also have a difficult time answering that because the marketing is something that they anticipate people not questioning. But I think we should start a conversation around how much of this is marketing versus truly species appropriate nutrition on a macronutrient level.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And natural history, knowing how what those birds have adapted to in the wild and how we can give them the most replicated experience when it comes to foraging and things like that are things that we constantly are pushing.
Yep.
And before we got on, you said, diversity is key. I use that word every day.
Yep.
Every day it's about diversity. Yep. Because when you have a diet that is 50, 60, 70%, 80% the same thing, and I'm sorry, folks, just in case you're wondering, a different color pellet, it's the same thing. So, that diversity of whole foods and letting them eat different things and manipulate those different things isn't just about nutrition, it's about enrichment and keeping the ticker here and here happy, right? So diversity over monotony is, I think, what you said, and that was...
And I think that's a really important point. I think part of these urban legends, like it's fine to feed parrots the same pellet every day because, like you said, there's different colors, and you can pick between, FD&C blue or yellow. All of the synthetic dyes don't mean different nutritional aspects; they just mean different synthetic dyes. You can feed your dog or cat the exact same scoop of dog food from birth to death. And what we know now from dog and cat studies are that the microbiome suffers. That if you're not introducing new foods with a macronutrient diversity that have different carbs, protein, fat, starches, moisture content, if you're not introducing different polyphenols and different antioxidants and different super green foods, all of these things play into microbiome. And what we know about birds is this: their microbiome is key, not just for the gut-brain connection, but microbiome plays into immune system health, organ health. It plays into behavioral issues.
Yep.
And taking these highly intelligent, highly emotional animals, putting them on an entirely processed diet that doesn't do a whole lot to feed their microbiome, but does do a whole lot to alter the diversity in their microbiome. Not only are we asking for gut-related issues, but we're asking for potentially chronic degenerative disease over a lifetime, not just from the nutritional monotony of not really being species specific for the matching what the bird is eating with what he truly needs cellularly. We're looking at creating a microbiome mayhem because it's lacking diversity. And we know that that's probably the number one thing that we can focus on for all life is diversifying the microbiome. And the only way you're going to do that is through a diversified diet. So the number one thing I want everyone listening here to take away is, even though I may have an addicted bird to a food, I'm going to make it my goal, because all you have is time and your bird has to eat.
Yeah.
All you need to do is every day commit to the fact that I'm going to work on diversifying my bird's diet for the rest of his or her life. And it's a slow and continuous process. It's frustrating. There's going to be a lot of hiccups, but you have nothing to lose by really rising to the challenge on a daily basis, because what you will gain is this tremendous microbial diversity in the gut, wholly absorbable nutrients that are in whole food form that are absorbed naturally the way that nature intended. Birds have not evolved to live on an entirely dead, inorganic, overprocessed little crunchy ball. They just didn't. Evolution occurs, but not in the 80 years we've been breeding captive birds.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And the fact that they can even really at this point exist eating a fully synthetic diet, what that proves to me are birds are much more resilient than we gave them credit for, but it doesn't give us the right ethically to nutritionally abuse them.
Right. And the long-term effects and what's going on inside that they're not showing externally. But I mean, we've got plucking birds out there more than ever before. I haven't seen a decrease in plucking at all. And we know it's multifactorial. It's not just one thing.
No.
But to give birds the nutritional support, that's like the foundation to help those birds. And it was funny that you bring up the microbiome. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was reading this fantastic paper about how you have to match the hours of sunlight you give your bird to where they evolve from in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is, of course, seems very natural, but the strength of the UV, how much lumens they need, everyone's question is, how long does my bird need in the sun? Well, where did he come from, right? What's his natural history? So some birds need a ton of sun at higher temperatures, and some birds need minimal sun at lower temperatures. Mm-hmm. But here's what's interesting. That plays into their vitamin D requirements. So birds that evolved in a bright area with a tremendous amount of sun have a higher vitamin D requirement. Well, that makes total logical sense.
Right.
When you call your pellet manufacturer and say, how are you altering vitamin and mineral content based on country of origin for the species? There's that long, awkward pause.
Right. Yeah. And the best we can do is throw as much diversity at them, hoping that we'll cover those bases. Yeah. But, and we'll get to sunlight, because I know lots of people have questions about light.
Yeah.
But back to the microbiome real quickly. I was at a conference just a couple of years ago at I can't name it, but a very prestigious, renowned medical institute. And I got to sit with these microbiome specialists and, animal microbiome specialists. Mm-hmm. And one was looking at just this amazing array of species from zoos. And one thing that kept coming up was the need for whole food, fiber from whole food. Like fiber just powers the microbiome and helps it flourish. Yes. And then those healthy fats that, unfortunately, I keep hearing people scaring bird owners from feeding healthy fats like good seed and nuts. They should be a part of the bird diet, the parrot diet, not the parrot diet. Right. That's why why seed has got such a bad reputation. But to say that walnuts are unhealthy, and that only birds that are free flying every day should eat a nut, like it doesn't make any sense.
But if you think about it, Jason, back in the 80s, when I went to my undergrad degree is in wildlife biology. When I went to become a wildlife biologist in the 80s, it was all about fat-free diets. We thought the same thing for humans. It was like, oh my gosh, saturated fat. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I don't know how my brain fired for 4 years, but I went on a fat-free diet because I believed that just was healthier for me. All I did, I'm surprised I graduated, because all you do is shut down your brain, of course. What we know now is that there's a huge difference between rancid fat or cooked fat, which is not good for anyone, and healthy, whole, essential fats. And they're called essential because literally the body can't live without them. So we have vilified fat for so long. It's interesting to me how slowly it's taken the avian community what I would say to avian veterinarians is, look around, folks. The human nutrition community has already accepted that healthy fats are the foundation, not just for preventing cognitive decline, but for all sorts of physiologic mechanisms. Every cell of the body has a lipid layer that required healthy lipids. And if you're not feeding healthy lipids, how on earth do you expect tissue repair, regeneration? How do you expect these physiologic processes that require healthy fats? We're denying our bodies, our pets' bodies, really important access to fat. But because there's the stigma of the F word from 20 years ago, avian medicine has quite a leg in catching up. So it is a little surprising to me that stigma is still out there, but it is. And you hit the nail on the head. I think the excuse or the default is, well, they're not moving their bodies. And because, we clip their wings and they sit on a perch, they shouldn't have access to healthy fats. That's a little bit like saying my 80-year-old parents who are beginning in cognitive decline, I'm really focused on getting them MCT oil to help turn their brains back on. I'm doing everything I can to help stimulate their brains are 60% fat. And we know the research is undeniable that the more healthier MCTs I can get to their brain, the slower pace the degeneration is going to be. And the same is true of birds as well. And so there's a huge difference between metabolically balancing healthy fats fed in appropriate portions from healthy species specific form, and feeding Crisco. I mean, those are just
Yes.
not right, or peanuts, right? This is not, we're not talking about that. So I
Right.
think part of it is that there's a lack of education and there's a lack of applicable translational medicine that has occurred because there isn't the research done in birds right now, Jason. Avian vets are saying just don't do it. And unfortunately, until independent, unbiased bird research is going to be funded, what I would hate to do is deny citizens another 20 years of critically important facts because the research isn't there to convince avian veterinarians otherwise. That would be a shame.
Right. And the research, you know, because I will hear non-science people on social media tell me how I should be viewing science, which is a little bit frustrating for me, seeing that I read peer-reviewed papers every week. But the simple fact is there is not a body of research for avian nutrition. And the research that is out there is, you know, so anybody that's relying on peer-reviewed research, there is simply not enough to go on. And that has a lot to do with funding and you know, things like that. That's frustrating for me because it's a lot of guesswork when it comes to these things.
Yes.
But what we can do is extrapolate in science.
Yes.
And everything you just did was extrapolation. We know how animal physiology works and what it's dependent upon nutritionally, and we can apply that and see the results. Like, that is science, folks. That's how it works.
But we need to extrapolate from the most recent information. Extrapolating our fat conversation from the 80s and early 90s, which is what's in avian medicine.
Yeah.
People need to catch up on the fat conversation because there's a lot that has transpired since the late 80s when we all feared fat as well.
Yes.
So the avian community we're a little behind. We're working on it, but there is absolutely still this pervasive thought that parrots should be on a fat-free diet. And it has devastating metabolic consequences.
Right.
The other devastating metabolic consequence is this cookie cutter nutrition protocol that comes out of ultra processed diets. And, you know, this concept of, if you were to call your favorite pellet company and say, hey, I'm really interested in looking at your nutritional analysis compared to all the formulas, because when you look at the SKUs that they're producing, and when you look at the tweaks that they are making, and when you really understand the natural history of where your bird came from, you're going to look at what your bird needs and what the food you're providing, and you're going to say, the macronutrients are not lining up to be metabolically supportive of the bird that I'm housing. I'm not sure that the food I'm feeding is correct, but I think part of it is bird owners don't have the basis to be able to make those correlations. And when you make those correlations for them, they go back to their avian veterinarian who says, no, you're not a vet.
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's true. However, I think we've made a lot of strides in just educating that diversity is so critically important just for mental stimulation, you know? But, you know, we need these things. And like, I mean, when I brought, you know, to the online group and to conferences, when I started talking about soaking nuts, you would swear that was like the greatest discovery of all time. I didn't come up with it. Remember the restaurant we went to in Chicago, the raw food restaurant?
Yes.
That woman wrote a book called Soak Your Nuts. And I went and found it. I had to ask somebody to find it for me at the bookstore because I couldn't find it. It was embarrassing to say, you know, do you have a book called Soak Your Nuts? But I mean, it's amazing how long these things have been going on.
Thousands of years.
Human nutrition-wise.
Soaking nuts for thousands of years, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
But just soaking nuts overnight, I was shocked to see how much more you can get out of them just by doing that. Like, those simple things, people are starting to see that those simple things can be added to a diverse diet, and birds will benefit from that. And honestly, so will we. Because if we're eating what our birds are eating, we're so much healthier. So.
And, you know, and I think that I think that just beginning to introduce new foods, and you hit the nail on the head, there's an emotional component for birds in terms of what they need. Birds are, in my opinion, are one of the most nutritionally denied species on the planet, in that they're highly addictive. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but the average American doesn't have an amazing diet. And because birds are highly addictive, oftentimes birds get addicted to human foods that are not healthy for them. And trying to get them off of those addictive human foods can be a real nightmare. So premise number one, don't get your birds started on junk food. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Same with kids. If you feed your 2-year-old Oreos every day and then try and get them onto fresh, salad or an apple at 5, forget it. They've already, their palate is already, they're like, I don't want to eat an apple. I want to eat Oreos. And if your bird eats pepperoni pizza every night, and then you try and get them onto sprouted seeds, it's harder. So if we can keep birds from developing unnatural addictions, that's premise number one. The one scenario I will say you can use junk food is I have taken the avian fear-free certification, so I'm certified fear-free for avian. And when it comes to going to the veterinarian, when we utilize junk food is at the vet. So once or twice a year for avian wellness exams, or if you have to bring your bird to the veterinarian, you break out those high reward food items like pizza. But only in those situations, because we need to use those foods as lures to minimize stress and anxiety happening at the veterinarian. But on a day-to-day basis, if we can really, the foundation is if there's anyone listening that is thinking about getting a new bird or has a young bird, just like young kids, if you can get them started right with an open palate, accepting a multitude of different foods, natural foods in their natural form early on, you won't create the nightmarish situation of having to wean your bird off of an addictive diet later on. And so don't go down that path initially. That would be my first recommendation.
Which includes some of those ultra processed foods that have things in them like peanuts that are addictive, or sugars that are added in order to get them eating it. And on top of that, then those are ultra processed, which can lead to all kinds of horrible compounds as those natural compounds transform with heat.
And it's interesting. Yes, that's exactly right. So when you combine raw materials together, so how extruded pellets are made is that the raw materials are thrown together. Now, yes, is it great that some of them are organic? Sure. But the other thing I think it's important for all the listeners to understand is that if you don't understand the difference between food grade raw materials and feed grade raw materials, now's a good time to have the conversation. So as of right now, I am not aware of any human grade bird pellets on the market. I'm not aware of any. To my knowledge, they are all using meals. And the reason why you can't go into your local human grocery store and buy soybean meal is because it's not approved for human consumption. There's enough residues, there's enough contaminants. You can't go in and buy these materials because they're meant for animal food, which means they're not tested for contaminants. They would never pass human food inspection for mycotoxins and a whole host of contaminants. We put them into pet food instead, including bird food. So these raw materials that have untested levels of heavy metals, glyphosate, mycotoxins, are the foundation of extruded food. And then we add to that synthetic multivitamins. And just on that note, I have to say there are human grade multivitamins, human grade synthetics that are lab made nutrients. And then there are feed grade nutrients. And one of the ways you can tell the difference is looking at what the words look like. And I would just encourage everyone, for dogs, cats, and birds, to avoid oxides and sulfates. So when you see on the back, let's say zinc oxide, that's a cheap feed grade nutrient. If you're going to feed synthetic nutrients, in my opinion, I'm a stickler for quality, at least feed human grade nutrients, synthetics. So no oxides, no sulfates. That's kind of a hard stop for me. But then there's also other synthetic nutrients, Jason, like menadione, the synthetic form of vitamin K, that has been in lab studies proven to be having some long-term consequences for potential organ degeneration. And sodium selenite, the synthetic form, the cheap form of selenium. Selenium is an expensive nutrient to buy. And the pet food industry oftentimes relies on sodium selenite, which is a questionable source of selenium. That's in almost all of the bird pellets that I've ever reviewed the label. That's my first hurdle, and that's the first hurdle I have with dog and cat foods too. But the second hurdle actually comes when we force this batter through a dye at high temperatures. And these reactions that occur, you hit the nail on the head. So when protein is heated to high temperatures and starches, you can get heterocyclic amines and acrylamides, which are two known carcinogens. But when sugar and protein bond together, you get the Maillard reaction, which eventually produces degenerative compounds, which are byproducts of the extrusion process. And they're called advanced glycation end products, and they're well known to everything from cancer to organ degeneration. And what we know about birds, at least in my experience in the last 20 years, is that the incidence of behavior issues, feather picking, all sorts of strange neurodegenerative conditions, toe tapping, wing flipping, twitches, seizures, a whole host of very strange symptoms that we are all scratching our heads wondering where they came from. We have to think about the somewhat synthetic environment our birds are in, what their lighting is, what they're smelling, what they're breathing in, what our home chemical load is. But we also have to evaluate what they're getting through diet. Mm-hmm. And extruded diets, ultra processed foods, have a whole host of insidious things that can come along through the processing process that can be passed up the food chain. And if that's their only source of nutrition over a lifetime, it doesn't take very long for you to connect the dots and think, okay, that
or
makes sense.
even the bulk of what they're eating, right? I mean, if it's a larger part of their diet, right, the fresh food, the antioxidants and all that stuff have to work that much harder to combat those things. So there's this internal war going on against these carcinogens and inflammatory compounds that we know are there, right? We like, and it's pretty frustrating because a lot of people will say, and I love that dog food commercial where they sit the people down and there's two easels. Which food would you buy with these ingredients? And they're like, oh, I would buy that one. But it's not about the ingredients only, right? It's about how those ingredients are transformed.
Manufactured. That's right.
Exactly.
Because,
right. Eating a well-done steak, we know is bad. My 90-year-old grandmother knew that.
Yeah.
You're going to cook out the vitamins, right? I mean, this is conventional wisdom, and it's true. What we didn't know is all the horrible things that end up in that food from over-processing, right? Yep. But then you have, you take it even further, and you're heating it to the point of dryness so that it has a shelf life. That's even more scary.
Yep.
And, and even with, you said mycotoxins, like, some of those molds, some of those fungi actually require heat and fire to spread their spores. Like, their spores do not become inactivated with those things. So we tend to think like we're going to burn the heck out of it and it's going to be safe, or we're going to freeze it and it's going to be safe. Like, that's not how it works.
No.
But it is frustrating.
So it's totally frustrating. So on top of maybe starting with poor quality feed grade raw materials that aren't species specific, like soybean meal is a good one, cornmeal, ground corn, all very common in bird pellets. Mm-hmm. In addition, whether or not you love glyphosate or not, or whether or not you love soybeans, in and of themselves, soy is a trypsin inhibitor. Soy is estrogenic. And so would I feed a ton of soy to anything that has a Y chromosome? A little bit of
avoid soy like the plague. Yeah.
If you want to grow boobs, eat soy. That's what I will tell you. If you don't want man boobs, back down on soy. And that is really no joke. And so when we feed a ton, and soy also blocks thyroid hormone. So when we think about feeding soy to males, bird or mammal, we think about what are the estrogenic effects long-term? what about trypsin inhibitors long term? What about the anti-nutrients that can be found in other, other types of foodstuffs? That's the first category, is how species, what's the quality of the raw materials, which it's all feed grade right now in bird food, and how appropriate is it? Not much. Then we have the processing techniques. Then it goes into a bag and sits on the shelf for a year, maybe till it gets, from the time it is produced to the time that it's sold at Petco, PetSmart, wherever you're buying it from. It's sitting there. Then we have storage mites and a whole host of other things that can come about. So when you put it together, and then the food has been so denatured, the proteins are denatured, the vitamin mineral loss is so profound, there's no more antioxidants, there's no more polyphenols. So where are birds getting their antioxidants? Hopefully there's some type of synthetic in there. That's not the way nature intended birds to get their antioxidants. There are no more polyphenols in that bag. So all of the beneficial effects that are found in those foods initially are long gone. And what that means over a lifetime is that if you're feeding pellets as 50% of the diet, then you are offsetting the potential for your bird to be getting the nutrients they need by using a food that is supplying a synthetic form that comes with a lot of caveats you should be aware of.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's one pellet that I recommend to people. There are no oxides, there are no sulfates, there are no meals. It's all whole food, and it's cold pressed. But there's only one. And what's nice is they don't claim that food is a complete diet.
Isn't it so refreshing?
Yeah,
People
and
get it.
we need more of this, right? We need more of this.
That's happening in the that's happening in the dog and cat world too, where people are like, listen, I can't do all raw, but you can do freeze dried. Same thing, where it's minimally processed, the nutrients are destroyed, it's species appropriate. So Jason, are you finding the company that's able to do cold pressed whole foods, what has been the response
by
the competitors? By other pet food companies?
That it's not complete, and that's, whenever I do a talk, whenever I do a lecture, it's always the same thing. I think my third slide is, there is no complete diet. There's no such thing. Just because they can say it has all these micro and macronutrients in it does not mean, first of all, that they survived the process, the processing, right? That's a huge deal, because if I see something that says now with omega-3s or now with DHA, that stuff doesn't survive. I mean, I learned from you years ago how sensitive omega-3s are outside of their whole food form, right? And I mean, if you look at an omega-3 oil the wrong way, it falls apart and is completely denatured, right? They're so sensitive. And so giving them in a whole food form, or at least a cold pressed oil that you use up quickly, something like that, is really the only way you can do it. You can't get those things in a processed food. Yep. And so it is, and I'm glad you talked about so many of those ingredients that, there's so many things on a label, and we tend to want to trust the label. But I think now more than ever, even if you're buying human food, you can see, I mean, it terrifies me that a box of like that really colorful sugary cereal says vitamin enriched on it. That drives me nuts. Like this, it doesn't matter. It's so terrible for you.
Well, but I think a better correlation for everyone to think about is, Ensure liquid beverage is a complete drink that we give people in nursing homes and hospitalized patients. It's a complete liquid beverage that you can drink and have all of your RDA for humans for vitamins and minerals. So you can just drink this can if you're hospitalized and get some nutrition in you. It's the same with pellets or complete and balanced dog or cat food. You can feed this can and get a wad of synthetics that will meet minimum requirements. And are we thankful that animals can get something? Yes, of course. Are those synthetics acting in the body like whole food nutrients? We don't know. We haven't, that has not been studied in pets. We know in humans that synthetics act very differently. That research hasn't been done on parrots. But we know that synthetics in the human body act very differently.
Yeah.
And we can surmise potentially that an entire lifetime of synthetically infused ultra-processed diets may not be providing what an animal would be getting in their natural state. I don't think that anyone's going to argue that. But here's what's, I think, most interesting, Jason. When you trace back this concept of complete and balanced for birds, it's even more scary than the concept of complete and balanced for dogs and cats. So the NRC, the National Research Council, in the 40s, did terrible experiments with dogs, cats, and chickens where they denied whole clutches or litters one nutrient. They saw what the metabolic effects were, and then they sacrificed those animals, and they said, okay, these were the organs effect, these are the blood parameters. Yep. This is how we actually establish minimum nutrient requirements for species. We did that with chickens, and we're using chicken nutrition as that. We didn't do this with parrots. No one has done long-term terminal studies denying clutches nutrients. There's a massive ethical problem there.
Yeah.
But what that means is we're really writing on highfalutin chicken nutrition science from the 40s for how we're nourishing parrots today, saying it's scientifically formulated.
Well, in dogs and cats, because that led to the advent of kibble in the 50s, correct?
Of course, 1951, Purina actually moved their extruder from the cereal line to the pet food line, and the first bag of Purina dog chow came out.
Yep.
Life has never been the same for pet food industry. But then bird food companies are like, hey, that's working mighty fine, and we can have a complete and balanced diet. But I guess the question is, what defines avian complete and balanced nutrition? I hope everyone listening understands that what would be defined as a nutritionally complete and balanced meal for a blue and gold macaw is not the same as a lovebird. It's just not. In fact, there's so little unbiased nutrition in the avian research pool. But Dr. Ellen Dierenfeld, who I love, did put out a paper. She evaluated, I'm going to pull it up for you, June of 2013, she came out with a paper called The Nutritional and Physical Characteristics of Commercial Hand Feeding Formulas for Parrots. And her concluding remark, she looked at all of the hand feeding formulas. And I think she stopped with hand feeding formulas because she didn't want a lawsuit. But what she said was overall, the inconsistency in the nutrient concentrations among the formulas suggests there's no consensus for the correct nutrition of growing cetaceans. There you go. Yep. That's an unbiased avian PhD nutritionist saying no one really knows. It's a guessing game. I don't want to say no one knows what they're doing. Every company's doing their best guesswork.
Yeah. And what we do know is that whole fresh food will deliver the nutrients in a bioavailable way that birds can absorb and actually use, unlike the synthetics that are pumped into processed food.
We know that an animal's evolutionary diet is metabolically and nutritionally significantly less stressful for them than a synthetic ultra-processed food. We know that conclusively.
Right.
What's interesting is the pushback we get. I would just call that common sense as a wildlife biologist. I just interviewed Fred Provenza from Utah State University. We talked about this exact concept, how animals that have been domesticated less than 100 years, there's no argument about the fact that they need their evolutionary diet, which would include, in theory, parrots. And yet it's already becoming an arguable point that you should only feed parrots a highly processed, ultra-processed diet because that's what the latest science shows. You and I are still waiting for that latest unbiased science because I don't see it. And so we really don't have a footing to stand on when we are telling clients and our friends, fellow avian lovers, feeding an ultra-processed diet is scientifically proven to be nutritious. We're all waiting for that information, and I don't see it in the literature. It's not out there. And so it's really our opinion against the manufacturer's opinion, and then starting a general discussion about the research that's needed, like comparative studies across different types of food categories, lifetime studies for avian medicine, species studies, species differentiation studies, macronutrient differentiation among species. All of these are untapped research projects that we're all desperately waiting for.
Right. And the understanding, I mean, as a scientist and an educator, I try to get through it. You can't take a single study and say, see, this is proving what I believe I'm feeding my bird. That is not how science works. We need a body of evidence. What we do have is we have a body of evidence that whole foods have these nutrients and that these nutrients can actually be used by animal physiology. That's what we know. We also know what happens to those nutrients when you expose them to excessive heat to the point of dryness. Like, those are well-established scientific principles.
Yep, they are.
In science, we extrapolate to make sense of those things.
Yes. And hopefully what this will inspire when people watch this conversation is, my gosh, there's a lot of research that's left to be done. And there is. Mm-hmm. And for us to be able to do our best work serving our avian patients as veterinarians, I believe that this is an area of focus that has dramatically lagged behind. It's the same with dog and cat pet food nutrition.
Sure.
The amount of unbiased nutrition information out there that is not produced from a company producing a product is so frighteningly narrow that it's painful to think about. And yet we're making pretty outlandish claims about what highly processed pet foods can do with no research behind it. So it's frustrating, to say the least. Yeah.
One of the arguments against feeding a diverse whole food diet that I hear all the time is, well, what if the birds only eat this and they miss all of the other nutrients, or they're only eating these certain things? We know that birds are going to pick out some favorites, and I really preach high diversity so that they're never getting too much of any one thing. Mm-hmm. There is no measure for that. But that's why diversity is so important, so that we can increase the number of items that they're exposed to in hopes that they will consume these things. But should people be worried about their birds missing out on a significant amount of nutrients on a whole food diet?
If your animal, or if any living creature only eats, and I have met kids whose moms say to me, my kid only eats chicken McNuggets and macaroni.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Yeah.
My answer would be, yes, you should be concerned. And do you see physiologic degeneration in a 6-year-old kid just eating 2 food items? Not at 6 years of age, but will it show itself in a multitude of lifestyle-related diseases later? It will. And the same is true of any other species that eats 1 or 2 food items. Yes.
Yep.
Here's what we do know. And this also, Dr. Provenza and I had this conversation. He was talking about wild turkeys and how they will intentionally gorge on certain foods, acorns later in the fall, to jack up their vitamin E right before winter. They'll gorge on certain foods to make sure that they are at their nutritional maximum going into certain times, certain environments. Their seasonal eating patterns are reflective of their environment. We know that all birds have that built into their systems, and they have innate nutritional wisdom, and that they don't need 4.5 pounds of any one food to derive enough manganese for adequate joint structure and fluid production. They don't need that. So it's very small amount of whole food nutrients that do a tremendous work in the body, and being able to provide, it's the nutritional diversity that provides the substrate for animals to be able to have choice. And the other thing that we forget is, birds don't have a spectacular sense of taste or smell unless you are housing vultures for smell. But let me tell you, there's a whole host of secondary mechanisms, including, like you said, how the food tastes in their mouth and visual acuity. Birds are choosing their foods based on a whole sense of sensory inputs that we have yet to really, in my opinion, fully flesh out, develop, research, and understand. Yeah. So they are making choices of how much they eat, what they eat, and when they eat, based on factors that we don't know everything about. And it's our...
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
It's our job to be able to provide for the species that we are housing species appropriate nutrients in whole food form that allow them to fulfill their nutritional requirements. We will fail our birds if we are not doing our due diligence in identifying the species we're housing. These are their nutrient requirements. These are the macros that the wild birds would get, and I'm going to do my best to provide that in whole food form. That's our job as guardians.
Which we can do. That is totally possible.
We can do it. It's easy. Yep. I mean, that's the easy part.
Yeah, I had seen a presentation and this is going back a ways, I think 2003-ish, that some AZA zoos had done on UV light and birds. And the findings were very interesting because birds that would live even in the same region, if they were understory birds, they had different responses to UV light than canopy birds, right? Which makes sense to me, just evolutionarily, it makes sense. But then how they view foods and objects with UV light reflectance also tells us some things, but we don't know. Like the research is very, very rare that you'll find something like that, especially with species specific for the hundreds of parrots, for example, that we keep, or even the toucans and things like that we're breeding. It's very interesting to see that like we don't understand this how they view the world.
That's right.
And we tend to do an anthropomorphic type view, like, well, if I see a red apple, I'm assuming that they're viewing it as a red apple and not this shiny, bright globe that's saying, "Hey, come eat me." And even things like those blasted happy huts and those fuzzy fleece things. It's like, no, we like to sleep in cuddly things like that. Birds should not be doing that. Birds should be locked in place on a perch. That's what they were adapted for. But we just tend to anthropomorphize, which does a real disservice to the birds.
Well, and I think on top of inaccurate anthropomorphization, I think we end up also potentially damaging our birds' environment through synthetic lighting, through synthetic smells, sound. And, I think most importantly, Jason, we are not evaluating circadian rhythm in birds. I had the honor of interviewing Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute, who was up for Nobel Prize on circadian rhythm. And we talked about birds and how a bird's circadian rhythm plays into feeding habits, foraging habits, plays into immune system well-being. The synthetic lighting in our homes alone is enough to shift our birds' appetites, shift their behavior, shape aggression. There's so much we don't know. In fact, the more I learn about birds, the more I realize how little we actually know and how much plays into their overall emotional, physical, and nutritional well-being that we are just now beginning to have a glimmer of. We don't.
Yeah, in my undergraduate biology work, I studied chronobiology and circadian rhythms, and I left that program thinking, why does everybody not have to learn this? I mean, how sleep affects organisms or the lack of sleep, how light drives activity or inactivity. It is absolutely amazing.
And I think about how many birds go to bed with the TV blaring and blue light, strobe light flashing, or the vibration of a subwoofer.
How many humans? How many humans do that?
I know. And what I tell people is, listen, you do you, and I'll help you do your pet. So I'm not here to tell people how to live their lives, but I do think it's important to think about that if you decide to do something in your environment that negatively impacts your person, that's your choice because you're in charge of your body. Where I think we have to ethically stop is when our decisions for potentially poor lifestyle roll over into affecting other animals or kids that don't have a choice. We got to stop there and at least think about the impact we're having. So birds can't make decisions to leave a vibrational field that doesn't feel good sitting next to a subwoofer. They can't say, hey, the router is bugging me. Hey, the fluorescent light is giving me a migraine. Like they don't have a choice to be able to say, I don't like my environment.
Right.
So when we see these animals that, you know, are plucking, we have to, it's not one or two things we think about, it's everything that we think about.
And it could be the owner's best intentions. They could have the best intentions by providing all of these things that they think that they need, and it still doesn't make sense to the bird, right? It doesn't fit with that bird. Yes. And that's, I mean, it's all, keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends.
You're right. And the scientific experiment in your home with your birds is different than the experiment in my home with my birds. I think the sooner we can all embrace individualized medicine and individualized husbandry, the healthier, more balanced environments we can provide for our avian friends, honestly.
Right.
the best thing we can do is take a really critical, objective look at the environment our birds are in, and really strip away all of our desire to be defensive and say, what could I be doing better?
Yeah.
In my
or
animal
different.
environment.
Yeah,
Or different.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, because when we're doing controlled studies, we don't have tons of environmental variables, right? That are just, who knows? Like, I remember growing up, my aunt had a parrot, and the parrot was making this noise, and she could not figure out what the noise was. It was the noise the clock on the wall made when it shifted to the 12th position, the top position. And
Yep.
that bird just somehow identified with that. So was that bothering the bird? We don't know. But those
Yep.
little things that we take for granted, and that's really the whole reason that I completely transformed, along with you, my thinking on nutrition is if I can give them a really good foundation of fresh food every day that's just full of, polyphenols, bioflavonoids, all those antioxidants that are going to help clean the cells, help condition the cells to be healthy, then I'm given that foundation that lets birds cope with the stressors in the environment. But they can't cope if they don't have that foundation.
That's beautifully said. That the environment that we house birds in, to be honest, is synthetically stressful enough, even when we're doing our best. It's synthetically stressful enough that if we can provide nutritional support that can help minimize metabolic stress, that's a beautiful gift that actually rolls over into other areas that will help them cope better and respire better and think better and have a calmer disposition and help them produce better neurotransmitters and help their microbiome become diversified and resilient and help keep their tight junctions sealed in their gut. There's all of these beautiful things that happen when you get diet squared away first.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just food. I just remember you coming to the bird club that one time and giving the first talk on tea. And that was that was so long ago. But I had heard about tea because zoos around the world were using teas to help stave off iron storage disease, for example, which is inherent to all the toucans, the mynas, the starlings, the lories and lorikeets, and then other things like rhinoceros and ring-tailed lemurs, for example, I know. It still amazes me that tea is seen as controversial because it's leaves and flowers. Like, and we're diluting them no less,
That's just it. It's almost homeopathic herbs and flowers.
Yeah.
Right? It's herbal medicine blended with homeopathy. No wonder everyone's in an effing uproar, right?
Yeah. Exactly,
so actually, where I learned about tea, Jason, and I probably told your group this, was the Berlin Zoo.
Yep.
I did a year-long internship at the Berlin Zoo, and they customize tea blends for almost all their animals. Every bird that's housed there, the reptiles get tea. Every animal gets a customized tea protocol because they're using tea as medicine.
Yep.
And that made total sense to me. You hit the nail on the head. Tea has a bunch of medicinal properties. It made sense to me. And so on top of customizing the diets for the species, they were throwing in whole food instead of using synthetic supplements or herbal compounds from companies in capsule form. They selected tea as their medicinal component to meet the animal's maybe trace mineral needs, but also, like you said, for specific physiologic conditions that could be remedied with whole foods. Why not use them?
Exactly.
So I learned that from the Berlin Zoo, and I found it even now when I talk to my zoo vets or lecture for zoos, they're like, why aren't we doing that? And I have asked myself, I do find it interesting that European zoos tend to be slightly more advanced and open-minded when it comes to thinking about using food as medicine. For whatever reason in North America, we don't use food as medicine. And then we wonder why we have not just nutritional issues, but the whole host of cascading events that happen when nutrition isn't squared away. So what types of, other than caffeine and maybe tannin, people are nervous about tannins, what's the pushback from tea other than it sounds woo-woo and maybe new agey?
That's really it. We often get people asking for peer-reviewed studies on the tea blends. There aren't any. But
there's no peer-reviewed studies on anything with birds.
I
There's
know,
no peer-reviewed studies in avian medicine.
but I can't. Right. But I can't think of anything whole food wise that's more studied than some of the compounds that are in these teas. Like green tea, there are thousands of studies on green tea and its components. Black teas, and simply buying organically decaffeinated tea is completely safe for birds or any animal. And caffeine's not a toxin; it's a stimulant, which a lot of people think, oh, it's toxic. No, it's not. We just don't. Some of our birds just do not need another stimulant, right? But besides that, we know what chamomile. Once again, my 90-year-old grandmother knows the benefits of chamomile on the digestive and nervous system. Things like calendula, and it's not only internal property, things that it can do for us internally, but also externally in skin conditions and things like that. I mean, I just bought a calendula-based ointment for wound healing right over the counter the other day. So those things it's commonly known, like those things have been well studied, presumably so that they could be patented in some kind of form, right? So I see things like EGCG, epigallocatechin 3-gallate, right? So that the green tea extract, I see that encapsulated all the time. Just drink green tea, and I know you and I have talked about those synergistic compounds where, eating a whole cranberry is so much healthier than cranberry extract because you're getting all those compounds that help the other important ones absorb and work, right? But we tend to like not acknowledge
we
those
tend
things.
to isolate. We tend to figure out what the active component is. So in turmeric, the active component is curcumin, and when we pull curcumin out of turmeric and we take it, it is different physiologically than the whole root. We call it the entourage effect, and it's this whole cascade of cofactors and supportive active factors within that plant or compound that help the synergism of the medicinal components be medicinal. And when you isolate a compound, when you take, I think that probably EGCG is a good one. When you take epigallocatechin gallate out, you can they've killed some cats, giving cats the green tea extract. You're never going to kill a cat giving brewed decaffeinated green tea.
Exactly.
So whenever you isolate an active ingredient of a compound, put it in capsule or tincture form, it becomes a potentized pharmaceutical, not a natural plant medicine or food.
Right.
And that's when it goes from food to potentially drug. So some of the digitalis, one of our most potent heart drugs for animals, including birds, comes from a plant, foxtail.
I think it's foxtail.
Something. But there's all of these natural compounds that I've never wild crafted any of these wild compounds and used them. I just go to Frontier Herb. I just bought 4 pounds of dried calendula from Frontier, but there are people that will go and harvest marigolds and make their own calendula. You're never going to hurt anything using, as long as you realize, of course, there's poisonous plants. You're not going to use theirs. There's poisonous plants for humans that you would not use. There's poisonous mushrooms for humans. All of those things, you need to be aware of what's not toxic and toxic. But using non-toxic herbs and plants in teas for birds, there would never be a toxic component, as long as you recognize that they're herbal. Now, when you get into things that have caffeine, like you said, it's a stimulant. It's not a toxin, but it's a stimulant. And who wants a hyperactive bird? No one. So be wise about your choices. But this entourage effect with all plants and herbs is something that I think is really important, because as scientists, we like to think, okay, what's the active ingredient that makes the magic? And oftentimes when we pull the active ingredient out, it becomes not only less magical, not as effective, and potentially toxic too.
Right. Well, and even when like the tea blends that we've formulated, it's a lot like feeding whole food diets. We want diversity. You don't want too much of any one thing. We don't want a ton of lavender that has coumarines in it that are blood thinners, right? So it is important to formulate these things carefully
Of course.
But offering a steeped tea that's developed for your animals, there is never going to be a problem or a contraindication.
And I guess what I would think is, I find it interesting that there's that much pushback. If you were gavage feeding, if you had a veterinarian stabilizing your parrot and tube feeding tea in a larger concentrations that are physiologically appropriate, you may get some type of physiologic response like diarrhea from increased peristalsis and too much fluid. If you are offering birds, this is the other thing we need to talk about, is innate wisdom. If you're offering animals cooled tea, or even if you're using tea as the diluent for a dehydrated food product. So if you're going to reconstitute, let's say that you're going to do soaked seeds and you want to soak your seeds in tea, awesome. Now you're getting that entourage effect even better because you're replacing your purified water with tea. That's like a killer protocol to get some of those polyphenols up the food chain in a really quick, easy fashion. That's a brilliant strategy. Your bird will never voluntarily eat so much of that reconstituted anything to ever have a toxologic event. It would just never happen. It's food. It's food.
Right.
So I think people should put their fear of tea to rest and recognize that these are formulated conscientiously. And your birds have innate wisdom to not overdose. Even if you gave them 4 cups of tea, they're not going to drink 4 cups of tea.
Correct. Right. Exactly. And, when it comes to drinking nutrients, it's a great way to trick birds into
all this drinking tea. Like I'm going to, because you've inspired me. Like we can't talk about it and not do it.
Exactly. But tea is a food. No one is recommending tea for birds as medicine unless you're a veterinarian.
Right.
And which you did for me, and it saved at least one life, that's for sure. But the nutrition components are just it's just beneficial. It's just another way to introduce those. Birds are a little bit like, it's like that commercial where mom is chasing the kid around to give him his cough syrup and he's hiding he's hiding in a corner and under the bed and all that sort of thing. It's like we have to trick them into good nutrition at times.
Absolutely.
And you are smarter than your birds. Like you can do this,
You can do this.
It could take weeks to months of introduction, but persistence pays off.
That's exactly right. And why not? I mean, tea is one of those things that is completely harmless. It's non-toxic. The research is pretty clear that, there's really good research on longevity studies in tea with humans, not with any other species. Yep. But you will do no harm in including those unbelievable polyphenols found in tea and a whole host of other compounds that are passed right up the food chain that can be incredibly helpful for birds, especially the calming effect. There's a lot of adaptogenic properties in many of these herbal teas that a lot of ungrounded, nervous, tension-filled birds living in their somewhat synthetic environment could really benefit from. And we can offer that to them in a I think the criticism I have received as a veterinarian, Jason, is, that's cute, Dr. Becker, that you would think of teas, but you also sometimes give homeopathic. What a bunch of BS. There's no medicine in it. If you think that giving tea is doing anything, it's funny to me that you think tea would somehow have health benefits. And that's cool. That's cool. Then just don't drink tea. But I do happen to think that over time, that there are health benefits in tea. They're very small, but they're there, and why not use them? So my criticism has been, it's just not effective. So why do it? And I just have a different viewpoint. I think that tea is helpful and could be quite beneficial over the long term. And most importantly, it's a gentle, easy strategy to get medicinal compounds into birds that oftentimes really need them. And you can, like you said, trick them into consuming these constituents without a stressor involved. Why not do it?
And it's really about maintaining homeostasis more than it is like treating a bird. I view it as balance, right? So if we're giving a bird a tea that helps with hormone balance, for example, or a tea that's calming, the birds aren't doped up. We're not giving them pharmaceuticals.
No.
It's just maintaining a balance. And, we hear from people all the time that are like, this works. Like, this has helped immensely. And we've heard from people who are like, I've tried this. I've talked about it with my vet. and we are now off medications.
Isn't
And,
it
you know,
wonderful?
like it's nice to hear that that's the one thing they changed, you know, the one thing, and that it's helped. But like, I mean, why not?
Why
Right?
not?
Why not?
And that I guess for the veterinarians that have said to me, I think it's really silly that you think that mostly people in my circles think that's just ineffective, but that would be my response is I get it and you don't have to agree, but why not? If you're going to reconstitute a bird food and you have a choice between water and tea, why not use tea? It's a lot like bone broth for my dog and cat clients. If you're feeding a dehydrated dog and cat food and you have the choice between reconstituting with bone broth or water, why not use bone broth? Yeah, I mean, it's not chock full of unbelievable nutrients that you can replace a meal with, but it does offer some really nice health benefits. And above all, it's not going to do any harm. Why not try it? Because oftentimes in very small amounts, some of these natural adaptogenic compounds found in teas can be, especially over time, can be quite beneficial at bringing the body back into homeostasis. And because it's food, you're never going to hit one extreme or another where you have to worry about, are they going to get twitchy? Can I touch their cornea? No weirdness will happen. So it just brings them back into a state of balance. That was a perfect way of phrasing it, and that's exactly what happens. But there's no harm in trying. The worst case scenario is you don't see anything. But just because you don't see anything doesn't mean that you're not having nutritive compounds being passed up the food chain. I drink teas chock full of polyphenols, and I can't say right now that you know what? I can feel the polyphenols working. I can't. I can't feel my polyphenols working, but you know what? I'm doing it anyway.
Exactly. Because long term, I mean, I've seen the long term effects. You know, I mean, the research doesn't lie. It tells. I mean, over time, we have just seen this body of evidence that many of the components are tea, and we have to extrapolate. You know, and it's funny because people say, well, there's no studies on birds. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. So much of what's tested for humans is tested on rats or primates or whatever, right? And then it's deemed safe for us. But all that extrapolation, I mean, that's just what we do in science, extrapolation. Like we know how it affects nervous tissue, so we're going to try it across the board. And the same thing goes for
translational medicine. Right? We call it translational medicine. And the same thing absolutely goes for birds. What we know to be somewhat safe for poultry medicine, in terms of basics, we have tried to translate into other species. And what we know to be true about physiology, we have transposed to other species because there are enough similarities. And when we do in vitro studies, looking at cell lines, we have included, there are some studies that are in vitro pertaining to avian cell lines, and their response is the same as other mammalian cell lines. So in some sense, we are wired enough the same in terms of a cellular response that we can feel comfortable with some aspects of translational medicine, especially when it comes to whole foods. Pharmaceuticals, I get the reservation.
Yep.
Whole foods, once we know that the toxicities have been weeded out, there are some foods that some species just can't eat. And once we get over that, I think we need to be able to take a deep breath and recognize we don't need to fear food as much as we do.
We need to stop fearing food. That is so true. And there's this pervasive attitude in the avian community in particular that birds are fragile and everything is toxic. And, birds can eat most things as long as it's part of a diverse diet.
Yep.
You don't want to feed a whole clove of garlic. That's probably not a good idea. But a little bit as part of a whole diet isn't going to hurt anything, and they'll reap the benefits. The one exception we all know is avocado, but that's really not because of the avocado, because birds in the wild eat avocados.
Yep.
It's because of how we process them and keep them unripe longer.
That's right.
And that's why that we can't feed avocado to birds.
And I think just thinking about how our food, even whole fresh foods, much of our food in the US is not grown in the US. We're importing a lot of our produce from South America.
Right.
And that also changes the constituents of the food. And that's something that in this situation plays into safety.
Exactly.
And those are conversations that we all need to have to be better educated to make better decisions. But understanding that those examples are rare and far and few, I think is really important. Generally speaking, the vast majority of foods that are in the fresh section of the grocery store are generally safe for most life.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's profound. That's a profound statement, because a lot of people are, they hear something or read something very quickly on social media. Mushrooms are another one. I had someone almost attack me because they were like, mushrooms are fungus. They're toxic to birds. Birds eat fungus in the wild.
Yeah.
With some of the research on.
Yes.
Sorry.
Well, so let's talk about mushrooms, because mushrooms, there are still people that think that mushrooms that are shocked that humans can eat mushrooms. There's just a lot of mushroom urban legends out there. Yeah.
And if they're toxic mushrooms, you don't eat them.
That's right.
But if they're edible mushrooms, they're safe for us and our birds.
Yeah.
Should they be pumping mushrooms into their body and giving them a ton? Of course not. Which has led to, birds may experience digestive upset. Well, yeah, if they're eating a ton of them, they're going to get digestive upset. But mushrooms are, if they're edible for us, they're safe for birds. They're non-toxic. And research has shown us that they actually can create vitamin D if they're exposed to sunlight. Like, you can literally buy them and put them in put them in the sun for, I think I read 15 to 20 minutes, and you'll already see some additional vitamin D. Now, it's vitamin D2. Can you speak a little bit to the difference between D2 and D3?
So, first of all, you are correct. Any mushroom that is safe for human. So let me just say this. Mushrooms range from toxic and they will kill you dead to literally life-saving. There are a category of medicinal mushrooms that chaga, for instance, chaga tea, chaga mushroom the research is profound. And the, reishi mushroom, turkey tail mushroom, Penn State did a study on turkey tail mushroom. It extended the life of hemangiosarcoma dogs by a year, giving them turkey tail mushroom. That's pretty profound. Birds benefit from turkey tail mushroom and reishi and chaga. All of the mushrooms that are medicinally beneficial for humans are medicinally beneficial for birds. You hit the nail on the head. If I were to eat 4.5 pounds of portobellos, could I have a GI upset? Yeah, probably. Portobellas, I guess. Yeah. Portobello, I think, is a restaurant in Chicago or something. Portillo's.
It could be. Oh, Portillo's. Yeah, we have those.
Yeah, I think the key is everything in moderation. But the reason that those mushrooms are called medicinal is that they contain a whole bunch of amazing things, including arabinogalactans, which dramatically and positively modulate the immune system. I mean, mushrooms really are oftentimes a gift to the body when it comes to rebalancing a very unbalanced immune system. So I use medicinal mushrooms regularly from reptiles, birds, amphibians, dogs, cats, mammals, chimpanzees, hippopotamus. I give medicinal mushrooms to everything. Small amounts, they don't taste fantastic in my opinion. So I use a small amount, but there's no reason that they can't be included in every species of bird diet in small but therapeutic amounts, because it's a tremendous way to help. And the research in terms of a prebiotic fiber on the microbiome, stellar. It's fantastic for building your bird's microbiome. If you cut mushrooms and put them in the sun after 20 minutes, research does show that UV irradiation does build up the level of D2. Now, birds can absorb D2 about 10 times less than they can absorb D3. And D3 is the more metabolically active form of vitamin D that all birds and mammals can use more efficiently than D2. It's a little bit like ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, vegetable sources of omega-3s for humans. A lot of my vegan friends say, I'm getting my omega-3s from vegetable ALA, or let's say from flaxseed. And what I have to burst their bubble and say, well, humans can do a little bit of conversion of omega-3, vegetable sources of omega-3, but not much. And birds can do a little conversion of D2, but not enough. And so there are other plant-based sources. So lichens, believe it or not, lichens are a blend between moss and fungus, or algae and fungus. Is kind of a hybridized. And I think wild birds eat a lot of lichens.
It's a mutualistic relationship.
Absolutely. And when they're, perching on the tree and there's lichen growth, birds consume lichens, and that's a direct source of vitamin D3. And you can buy lichen D3 supplements for birds as a whole food supplement, which is fantastic. There's other, like yellow oatgrass. I know I've never fed it, but yellow oatgrass is a South American perennial herb that is direct D3, passed up the food chain. So there are some plant-based sources of vitamin D3 that can be fed directly to birds in whole food form. But in addition to
mealworms, we've seen the mealworm studies too. Was that what were you going there? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's perfect. I was going to say, but that's probably the most recent and exciting thing in the veterinary world is that insects, so black soldier fly larvae, some species of cockroaches, but most predominantly mealworms, are capable of absolutely creating a lot of D3, wholly absorbable D3. So when we think about the omnivorous aptitude of our avian species, if you are housing a bird that is an omnivore that needs to be eating whole live fresh bugs, mealworms are a fantastic source of vitamin D3, and feed them ad libitum. I mean, just those are fantastic treats. Yep. Vitamin D3 is as important for birds as it is for humans. Now, ideally, because birds like humans can derive and make vitamin D on their own if exposed to natural sunlight, my first preference as a proactive veterinarian would be do what's natural for them and give them some sunlight. That's a common sense approach and strategy that I believe is underutilized in avian medicine. And I would say,
they don't need to be outside all day to manufacture D3.
No. And I would say, like humans, if you can get 20 minutes in, you have activated the metabolic processes of that process in motion. And that is fantastic. Which will continue beyond. That's exactly right. When, if you're going to sit outside with your bird for 20 minutes, get as much sunlight on your body as you can. If you are comfortable outside, your bird will be too. Of course, you're not going to leave your bird outside unattended or leave your bird in a hot area, not being able to get into shade. Obviously, there's a bunch of common sense basics. My preference would be birds build their vitamin D stores and achieve their daily requirements through natural sunlight. Living in Chicago, that's impossible for half the year. So you will rely on full spectrum bulbs, and those are not perfect. They're not perfect for a lot of reasons, but using a bulb occasionally in the winter and then really stocking up on vitamin D during the nice summer months is my best strategy and suggestion for making sure that birds have adequate vitamin D stores throughout the year. Bolster them up in the summer because we know through the winter they're going to slide, and we can help fortify a little bit with a synthetic full spectrum.
Yeah, and we do that with our reptiles too, like box turtles and things like that. They're out all summer. They have access to sunlight, and they do so well through the winter. Exactly. As a result of that. So, having this, once again, things don't need things within a 24-hour period, right? They can get it on a Tuesday and benefit from that beyond those days. But we've been conditioned as humans for, recommended daily allowance, right? What do you need every single day? That's not how it works. And so,
and Jason, that plays into food too. I mean, I think that this is part of avian veterinarians looking at a whole food spread with 16 different food items and saying, oh my gosh, what if there's not enough manganese?
Yeah.
When we look at today, when we look at whatever we're going to have, you and I are going to have for dinner after this podcast, I'm not going to flip out when I look at what I'm eating. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I meeting my selenium requirements? I'm not going to freak out because my diet is wildly diverse, and I might not get it today, but I'll eat a Brazil nut tomorrow and meet my selenium requirements. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
You said occasional when it comes to supplemental light. Do you have any like basic ground rules for full spectrum lighting?
It depends on the light you're using, the species that you have, and how close it is to the animal. It really
Right.
does. I also believe with synthetic full spectrum lighting in the house, birds still need to have an area where they can get away from it, especially if they're hypersensitive.
Yes.
We know that long-term close exposure has resulted in some ocular damage.
Right.
So birds need to be able to still get, so I just put a towel across the top of the cage where they can get out from under it. And I don't make my birds sit under that all the time. Optimally, if you can condition your birds to recognize that that the full spectrum lighting is here, many birds will choose to go and sit when they need it and then choose to move away. So I'm all about giving all life choices. Choice in food, choice in temperature preference, choice in how they're handled. Choice is a foundational principle of quality of life. And I don't believe we give any of our animals enough choice to be able to make their own decisions. And
well, and that's pervasive across all four of the tenets, right? I mean, when it comes to health, when it comes to nutrition, foraging, enrichment, all of those require some choice on the animal's part. Yes, they will make bad choices. What organism doesn't. But we can give them choices of good things, so they're at least choosing good things.
That's right.
In the long run.
That's right.
And
so, we can transition them. If they're eating a really bad diet now, we can transition them to a kind of bad diet, to an average diet, to a kind of good diet, to a good diet, to a better diet, to an excellent diet, to a superb diet. That's a transition. And you don't get from a crappy diet to excellent, superb diet overnight, but we can offer choices that facilitate a palatability change, and we can work with our birds as their habits change and offering them foods in a diversified pattern that allows them to make better decisions over time. And that is our responsibility, to provide those options.
And those options could be the same food in a different form. It could be whole, it could be diced, it could be on a skewer, it could be on a plate. Like, that's, once again, knowing what their natural history is, right? So we've got grazers like cockatiels who, if I put their food on the ground, will feed all day long, versus a bird like a macaw that may hang upside down from a branch to grab fruits and nuts and things like that. And things that we don't even inherently know to feed. Bonnie Zimmerman, who runs the Indonesian Parrot Project, she's a great friend of ours. She said, she's like, I literally watch lorikeets eat papaya seeds right out of the papaya. They're extremely nutritious and they love them. Or I've literally watched a cockatoo eat larvae, worms, from tree bark.
So cool.
I've watched them eat tree bark. You know, like these things happen, but because there's not a peer-reviewed research paper on it somewhere, they tend to think that it doesn't exist. And that's not the truth.
And so that's the lecture that needs to occur in every avian medicine course in every vet school around the country. Because if vet students could hear wildlife biologists and seasoned veterans who have hands-on avian experience like Bonnie and a whole host of other people that are astutely observing the natural behaviors and the natural history of animals in their natural environment, those are the people who are best qualified to say, this is what I've seen and this is what we know. That's the information that not just forms the foundation of observational research, which is how all research starts, is through observation first.
You observe it, right.
You observe it.
It starts there, yes.
Yeah, and then you start talking about it in a group, and then
you can't study it if you don't know if it doesn't exist. I mean.
Right. That's the foundation. We need to start there. Yeah, for sure.
So, and I guess that kind of goes into the whole omega-3s. I touched on it a little bit before, but omega-3, animal bodies are dependent upon omega-3s. Dogs and cats can get it from raw meat diets, right? They can get it from that whole food diet. And I, as a raw food feeder now, and it took, for those of you that don't know, it took Karen Becker 2 years to convince me to put my dogs on raw. And when I did, their health problems literally disappeared. It's not magic, it's just science, it's physiology. And when I was giving them the nutrients that they could actually absorb and not poop out in these giant piles in the yard, everything changed. Two of the dogs that I rehomed came to me with horrible health issues. They couldn't climb stairs. They couldn't get up on the couch. They had yeast infections in every crease and crevice. Within 3 weeks, they were on their hind legs begging for treats. It just was so shocking. Yeast infections disappeared without medication because their bodies went back to that whole homeostasis. And both of them, we finally put to rest, and they were 18 years old. Now, these dogs had a plethora of health problems, genetic problems, and we kept them alive with a good quality of life all the way to the end because of what you recommended. And I will never be able to thank you enough for educating me and getting me started in my own research. But it's those omega-3s that are so important that are inherent in these whole foods. What are the best sources of omega-3s for birds? Because we know birds are really dependent on them. They have to be absorbable. And omega-3s denature in the slightest temperature increase with exposure to light. Shaking a bottle of oils can cause denaturation. So, what do you recommend are the best sources for birds on a regular basis?
So, seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds. Seeds are something that, there again, when I graduated from vet school, I was taught to never feed seeds. You just don't do it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the whole, eating fat makes you fat, and we should all eat a fat-free diet, and we should never feed seeds to birds. I think that stems back from people that just fed sunflower seeds, and their birds had a lot of nutritional issues. But what we know now is that seeds are some of the biggest hailed superfoods for humans.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is absolutely true for birds. Pine nuts actually have a little bit of ALA in there too. So seeds are the richest source of omega-3s that are wholly absorbable, that can be passed right up the food chain. And most importantly, birds love them.
Yeah.
They want to eat them.
Mm-hmm.
They need them. They go crazy for them. And I think part of the reason that they're so obsessed with them is that most birds are so omega-3 deficient that you almost see a frenzied response when they're offered. Right. You can see you can see birds all just become, you can see an excitatory response. When they find foods that they are deficient in, you will see them get quite excited and then gorge. And there again, if you're not familiar with looking at that behavior, thinking, I wonder if that's a nutritional deficiency. When you see an animal, their eyes pin, and they grab the edge of the cup and they hold it with their foot, and they just can't get enough.
Yep.
Think about why say to yourself, why is that occurring?
Right.
Because their bodies are most of the time, birds are so deficient that they have to make up such profound deficiencies. And because we were taught to never feed seeds, and it's a big taboo and no one's doing it, omega-3s are one of the most hardest to come by essential critical nutrients that the vast majority of birds I see are deficient in. Now, if you can't do any of that, algae, and you can derive from algae, algal oil, which has DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, and EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, both. So there are some algae supplements, whole food supplements that you can use to get DHA and EPA if you are, for whatever reason, you are not going to feed seeds. But why on earth, if the human nutrition community has recognized that hemp and chia are superfoods, dog and cat community have recognized hemp and chia are superfoods, what's the hang up with our avian community? I'm a little stupefied.
It's that fear of fat. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Sunflower seeds, you mention sunflower seeds on some social media groups, and you will be removed. You will be kicked out. And it is this torch and pitchfork type mentality that sunflower seed is dangerous. Sunflower seed is extremely nutritious. All you have to do is look it up. It is extremely nutritious, but you shouldn't be feeding it as the primary part of a diet. There should be no primary part of the diet.
So let me say this, as an avian veterinarian, my recommendation on where your birds would get vitamin E would be in sunflower seed. I mean,
Exactly.
that's a fantastic source of vitamin E.
Yep.
So everything in moderation. If
Mhm.
all we fed our birds were hemp seeds, we would have nutritional imbalances.
Exactly. Yep.
And so it's not about making this the sole food source. Sunflower seeds have profound nutritional spectrum, but they're not a nutritionally complete food. So if you feed any one food over time, you will accrue nutritional deficiencies. But all seeds really can be an incredibly valuable part of a whole food diet for birds, especially if they are human grade, unsprayed organic or sprouted. That's fantastic nutrition.
Exactly.
That is mineral dense, that is a great way to get a tremendous amount of nutrition into birds in a format that they actually enjoy eating. It's satisfying emotionally to eat foods that they recognize that they enjoy eating and that are nutritionally beneficial for them. That's a win-win-win.
Yep. So seed is not the devil. Only seed is not recommended, but a diverse whole food diet with lots of different things, including sunflower, is okay. What about tree nuts? I know you love tree nuts.
I do. And I'm a huge fan of tree nuts. And there again, the fat content. Would I say just give a bowl of tree nuts every day, all day? No, of course not. Of course not. But tree nuts, especially for minerals, that's a big source of where I go to find a variety of minerals for birds.
Mm-hmm.
So tree nuts in moderation, appropriately matched for your species, it is a beautiful gift for meeting your bird's micronutrient requirements. And that's a really important thing on top of healthy fats and great protein. Yep. So tree nuts are a really good addition that I think complete a whole food diet that you would not want to deny your birds, especially when you see how excited they get when they eat them.
Well, and even like, because I'll hear that too, like nuts are junk food, I've heard from people.
Interesting.
And I'm like, oh my God, no. Walnuts are so valuable.
And so all this tells me is that these are people that are not they're not into human nutrition whatsoever. Because
I think that's a problem, but I also think they think that birds are so drastically different, but we're all animals and we all have the same type basic foundations that we have to meet, because animal cells are animal cells, right? That's one of the things that you and I had to study from the get-go is what are the, how do cells function, cellular biology, and,
So I guess what's interesting is if I had to choose to have my lovebird get their source of selenium from sodium selenite, the synthetic potentially toxic form of synthetic selenium found in the vast majority of bird commercial ultra-processed kibble, bird kibble, pellets, or the whole Brazil nuts is half the size of a lovebird. So you're not, I guess that maybe common sense also has to be applied. You would not give your lovebird a Brazil nut because you would cut your Brazil nut into a little tiny piece and say, hey, I'm going to meet your selenium requirements today with this fraction piece of Brazil nut. That is a brilliant strategy. So part of it is recognizing common sense, portion size, and your bird's metabolic requirements. If your bird is an active flyer, they get to eat more calories. If your bird is a perch potato, then you will not be able to give as many calories. But that doesn't mean that you limit nutritional diversity, and that doesn't mean that you limit the scope of what you're offering. You still offer everything, you just offer smaller amounts of everything.
Right. And I make a mash every week that has soaked items, sprouted items, diced veggies. I throw the teas in there, both wet and dry, so there's flowers. I've grown edible flowers in my backyard that I feed to all of the animals for the bioflavonoids and all these other, compounds that they bring to the table. And soaking nuts and things like that, when I mix it all together, it's part of a conglomeration of things.
Yes.
So I like the randomness of taking a scoop and putting it in a bowl because it's different than the combination they're going to get tomorrow. I always want the birds guessing. I don't want them to become dependent or complacent with certain food items. But then if you have those nuts in there that are so important and they're all mixed in, you're going to be giving them them here and there, but they're not going to be getting like your lovebird isn't going to get an entire Brazil nut in its food. So diversifying it and doing that type of thing makes it easier for the human to make and keep, and increases the diversity every day. Every single day, there's a whole different complement.
And every scoop is different. And so for that day, and what's cool is the bird gets this incredibly pleasurable experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's a visual feast, but it's also a nutritional feast metabolically for their body and nutritionally. So they have this incredible spectrum of colors and flavors, taste, input that they're able to discern, but also have an enjoyable eating experience. And I think that that's something that we really underestimate for all animals. We just tend to take a scoop, put it in the bowl, and be done, or offer them one or two of their favorite slices of fruits and veggies that we think are good enough and call it a day.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're denying them the emotional experience of eating. And I think birds spend so much time, their evolutionary history, so much time looking for what to eat and then enjoying eating it. We need to work really hard at emulating that.
Yep. And we can make it easy if we have a system where we throw as much diversity at them as possible so that they're bound to eat. And one of the things that often I'll hear is, well, my bird won't touch that.
Yeah.
But when I mix it in with other things that they readily recognize as food, all of a sudden that becomes a food item. But it's also how I'm serving it, on the ground or hanging from a skewer or in a foraging device or in a bowl that's higher up than lower. All these things that we try. I kind of like it because it's science. I get to experiment with things and see what they'll take to. But the birds like it because it's different, and we need to stop anthropomorphizing and saying, oh, my bird hates that. Like with live mealworms. I give live mealworms to everything. And I will hear all the time, oh, my bird would be terrified of that. Well, I don't think they're terrified. They just don't recognize it as food. And they will if they become accustomed to it. Maybe start with freeze-dried mealworms, or something like that. We have to get over some of those things.
But I think part of that, Jason, comes back to choice again. That's the guardian saying, I've decided I'm making the choice that my bird wouldn't like mealworms. Well, have you tried and have you given multiple opportunities over a period of time for the bird to make the decision? We tend to be helicopter parents in all regards. We all tend to have more control issues that we want to talk about. So rather than actually provide the experience and offer the opportunity to allow the bird to make an independent decision, it's like, I know what's best. I know what's best for a whole other creature that I've never been inside of or thought about before. And I think if we can if we can take a step back and recognize that's interesting, I've not tried it, but I'm going to give it a whirl. That is a better response that's more honoring to the bird that I believe has the right to experience a multitude of different diversified feeding styles and platforms and experiences that best mimic what they would be getting in nature.
And it's healthier for us as bird owners to say, I hear people often who will be like, I don't need your help. Thanks for offering to help, but I don't need your help. I've got this. Like, I've done my research, being open, like I hear about things all the time and I'm like, oh, I need to try that, or I didn't know that existed, and then can add that to my already diverse offerings. And to be closed-minded and say, no, I know that sunflower seeds are the devil and I will never feed them. And how dare you even recommend that? It really is, I view that as a disease. I really want people to be open-minded because you're just doing your bird a disservice. And we need to stop fearing food, like you said.
Yeah. And I think I find it interesting there again. You can make those decisions for your body. Like, I hate artichokes. I'm never going to try an artichoke. You can't make me try an artichoke. No, you're right. I can't. And it's not my place to make you try an artichoke. However, if a bird's evolutionary diet includes a plant or several plants that you have access to and you could easily offer, but you just out of premise are refusing to do it because you want to be right and you're not giving your bird the opportunity to make a choice on its own, that's where not only are we limiting our birds' opportunity for foraging and an entire experience that I think that they're deserving of, we're limiting their nutritional exposure to a varied diet that allows them to be healthier over a period of time because of our, I don't want to say belligerentness, but because of arguing a premise versus potentially trying something new and different that would provide a better nutritional opportunity for our birds.
Yeah. And that's why I really appreciate so many of the vets that I've come to know, because they have that, they're open-minded and they're willing to learn more about something that they're not trained in. And that makes a good vet. That's in my opinion, what makes a good vet, because you have to be flexible because so many different things are presented to you. Like I just can't, you know, and for me, it's a lot like teaching. If I get a student at the university who needs to learn in a different way, I need to learn more about that student so I can help meet their needs.
And that's
because I want them to learn biology. I want them to learn how to think scientifically.
That's so beautiful, Jason. That's amazing, but that's also not every teacher. It's you're going to learn my way or the highway.
Right.
Or, you know,
well, and some vets, yes.
and actually a lot of vets. And so I think it comes down to, if you are by nature a student, if you're a student of life, if you're either cut from the cloth of I don't know everything and I'm interested in learning more, and every day there's an opportunity to learn something more from someone who knows more than me, or someone that has a different vantage point that I'm actually going to stop and listen to enough to maybe at least begin a dialogue. Or you graduate from school and you know it all and you don't need to learn anything else. And I know what I learned when I graduated and you're not going to teach me anything. I think part of it is personality combined with your willingness to engage in a conversation and recognizing you don't know everything. But there are a lot of know-it-alls out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, vets are so critically important to wellness, right?
Huge.
What vets can do with medicine and surgery and things, that's what they're trained in, and they're critically important. But they also should be lifelong learners, just like the rest of us in the professional fields. And you know, I remember asking a vet, she's kind of well known, not you, but a different vet, and I made a comment about parrot nutrition in vet school, and she looked at me and said, "What, we get a day of that in vet school?" You know, like, what are you talking about? We only learn about that a day. Like, that's not part of it. So, you know, there's so much learning to go on forever, you know, and we just keep learning. And then I like to share, that's how I started, knowing the science of nutrition, teaching the science of animal nutrition at the university, and sharing what we know about birds and our experience. And, you know, I'm lucky to have a colleague like you who's just so open and has taught herself and learned so much. I mean, you just can't go wrong.
The cool thing about collecting a pool of avid learners and perpetual students is that the conversation never stops, because the science is constantly evolving, and it's our job. I mean, we'll have an entirely different, in another year or two, when we do this again, we will have evolved and learned more, and we'll have a different conversation, because we're always putting into place what we've learned, tweaking and modulating things to provide the best care with the most up-to-date research and science that's potentially available to us for translational medicine. That's the goal. Right. If you're not interested in evolving and change, I have no problem saying I totally recommended organic kibble for parrots. The first 10 years of my avian career, I sold and recommended kibble for birds, not for dogs and cats, but for birds. I can totally talk about that as a stepping stone in my learning evolution of not connecting the dots then that I've connected now. Yeah, I think you have to, in order to talk about this stuff, you have to be willing to talk about the mistakes that you've made. And not all people are comfortable doing that.
Absolutely.
I get it.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember attending the very first seminar on pellets, and boy, we were excited. I mean, I was
I totally remember that too.
18 or 19. You were probably in the room and I didn't even know it. But,
exactly.
You know, like just being so shocked by this new way to feed. But we learned our lessons.
And I don't know if you walked, I was at, I don't know if it was that lecture, but I was at one where I walked away literally floating, thinking I will be able to use this food technology to fix all of those nutritional crises that I saw that I couldn't fix. I just thought, I am so thankful to have this tool in my toolbox because it's going to
Yep.
fix everything.
Right.
And then, of course, you know, we had to recalibrate and retool because it didn't. And a ton of dog and cat veterinarians are coming to me saying, you know what, I had high expectations also for complete and balanced diets. And I'm realizing that the vast majority of what I'm seeing in practice is related to nutrition. And I can see it's clearly related to the ultra processed diets. And I have to retool my thinking. It's happening in small animal, mammalian veterinary medicine. It's not going to be too long before avian medicine has no choice but to confront the fact that we are nourishing birds with species inappropriate foods in a species inappropriate form that is not meeting the nutritional or evolutionary historical patterns that our avian species need. It's not, we're there. We have to start the conversation of, I did that. We can all have like a party of a confession party. We all have done it. And we all can say, we thought it was going to be the Holy Grail and it wasn't. So what do we do now?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of not fearing food, trying to give them more of what we know is good.
Yeah.
Boy, we covered a lot and this was so much fun. It's always such a pleasure. Always such a pleasure. And I'm so glad you could make time to do this. I'm glad you're healthy and thriving. And we will have to do this again. Hopefully we won't have to wait as long.
Well, I was going to say at the next pandemic, but I'm not going to say that. No, let's do it again. Yes, we'll do it again when time allows. And probably, you know, nutrition is an evolving science, and part of that is humbling and part of that is super exciting for me. And so when we know more, we can feed better, and that makes us better veterinarians, but better guardians. That just makes us better all the way around. And not just that, our birds live longer. We can improve health span, but we can also improve lifespan. So there's lots of benefits of implementing these changes that we know to be true and making these small and subtle shifts along the way to be able to do what we can. Because over time, as we begin recognizing the monumental role of food in an animal's life, we can start a conversation about what else can we be doing. Like you said, food is really important, Jason, but it's not everything. And so when we get food squared away, we can begin thinking about all of the other aspects that really constitute thriving, in the sense of looking at an animal's entire environment, including their emotional well-being, that comes after we get food squared away.
And that's really what I learned from you, is that surviving isn't enough. Right. We want to get them away from surviving and thriving. And that is, we can do that through the 4 tenets: health, which is what veterinarians are for, nutrition, which forms a really strong foundation, and then enrichment and training to keep them active mentally and physically. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you for inviting me.
So appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Jason.